I'm super excited to welcome David Horton to class today. And, David and I have kind of crossed paths in the world of commercial photography for a number of years now. And, it's funny, I always knew David was a designer, but he was also a very serious photographer. And I was always interested in his work. But in the beginning of 2021, I remember seeing a very cryptic note on social media by David that essentially said, in my memory, it just essentially said, I have a book coming out and I'm very excited. It'll be available. And, David always caught my curiosity. His work I was always curious about it. And, I enjoyed working with him professionally. And I just bought it sight unseen. I had no idea what it was about. Knowing him was enough to want to see what he was up to with this book. And when it arrived, which was the beginning of this very eventful year, 2021, it was just kind of very surprising. The book, in my memory, and I don't have it with me now, had no words, it had no description, and it was a series of portraits of this kind of interesting young woman. They weren't really portraits. It wasn't really a day in the life type of thing. They had something special about them. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but the body of work looked nothing like David's previous work to me. And the defining thing that made it so different was previously his work to me looked very almost geometric, or it had a kind of street photographer sensibility. And this work suddenly had an emotional thread that jumped off the pages and just landed in your lap. And to see that shifting gears was like startling. And, I remember at the time I said, David, I have no idea what this book is about, but it seems like there's a lot of substance here. Can we just get on the phone and I'll talk to you about what this might be about? And he's like, oh, yeah, sure. And, talking to him that day made me realize he'd be wonderful to kind of share his story with our classes here. So with that cryptic introduction, let's welcome David Horton from Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. It's a really nice introduction, Tim. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You are welcome.
And actually, what's really cool, and you probably remember this, the way I found you was through your book about your son.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
That was long before I actually even was able to hire you professionally, and it was years afterwards, but that's how I discovered you. And
that is true. Yep, these paths wind.
Indeed. I'm sorry, you were going to say something else?
Oh, I was simply going to say, I can stop sharing here and we will turn this over to you. And the one announcement I would make, we have two classes here, really. A grad class and an undergrad class. These students are the best of the best. They have great questions, which may throw you for a loop. And what I would say to my students is, let's put our questions in the chat and I'll try to bring them up as we have in the past. And then at the end, we'll probably have a looser period where David can answer your questions. But if things occur to you, add them into the chat and then we'll find ways to introduce that. And with that, David, I'll turn this over to you.
Yeah. I'm up for any kind of hard questions that anyone comes up with. I'm all for it. I'll do my best. I don't know, maybe you'll stump me, but I'm up for taking any questions you have. So don't hold back. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. So Tim thought that it would be helpful if I gave you a little bit of background. I'm not going to go deep into the background, just sort of a broad sweep. But I've always been into photography, and I guess really started taking it kind of seriously and learning that you could express yourself with it. When I in my 20s, I took a cross-country bike trip with three other friends, and had an Olympus. It was obviously all film back then, and had an Olympus point and shoot, and just really started using photography in a different way than I really ever had before. It was sort of, I was experiencing the country and photographing it and the people that I met. And I don't know, so that sort of opened, that was early on in my photographic days. And then much later, I ended up getting into street photography, and I'm just going to sort of burn through about 10 sort of general images. I'm also in an international street photography collective, which is kind of a whole nother story, but we all sort of push each other. And, so these are all about trying to make emotional connections, looking at the world in different ways, and sometimes trying to add an element of mystery. For any of you that have done street photography, it's really, really hard. And that was part of what I loved about it. Not only do you have to be really fast and compose really quickly, but if you're going to try to do anything deeper than that, you've got to also throw that into the mix. And so it just takes a lot of practice, and I loved it. And I still do. But some of what I experienced in doing, sort of street photography, and I'm calling this street photography, but really it's reportage photography all over, different places that I'll go, different things that I'll see either around me or while traveling. I sort of lost my train of thought there, but oh, yeah. The thing that I realized in doing this type of photography is that I really enjoyed going into, sort of experiencing these places, but I realized that I really liked to stay longer, and in street photography in general, it's more fleeting. And there's only so deep that you can go in those moments. And it also, a lot of street photography just reinforces, the single frame. And I also found that very limiting. How much can you pack into a single frame becomes very limited. And so I think this is sort of the end of just interesting moments. And again, so this was a bar in the bayou in Louisiana. And again, it gave me a sense of like I hung out with the locals and, long enough for them to get comfortable with me and me taking pictures. And that's where like shots like this happen. So that led me to being much more interested in taking on more documentary work where I could really just sort of embed myself into situations, let people get comfortable with me, be open with them while they're being more open with me. And that allows, what I found, you can go deeper. So yeah, they're aware of you there with the camera, but they're sort of not after a certain point. They trust you. It takes a long time. So anyway, so this first documentary project that I'll show is a mental health facility here in Boston that I worked on for 5 years. And because my day job as a graphic designer, I could only go there on the weekends, but I went every weekend, almost every week for at least 2 years, and then continued whenever I could, on for 5 years. And I won't get into it's kind of a big story about the building, the facility, and the people there. But it just gives you, it was a deep dive, and I found it much more satisfying than the one-off shots that you get in street photography. And I'm also, I guess you could say, a people person. So I really enjoy people and talking to them. A big part of this project was also not interviewing sounds a little formal, but talking to them and writing down things that they shared with me about their life stories. And as you can imagine, they're pretty heartbreaking. But this just goes to show you, I mean, very quickly, this building was built by an architect in the 60s, brutalist style architect. And his concept behind this building was to design a building that was insane, so that the people that were living there, as he understood, would feel, more at home, because the building was insane. It's a very long story, but I found it so bizarre and so missing the mark. And it's a huge building in Boston. That's really what led me to wanting to understand, what is it like to live there, and getting to know the people that live there.
So this is Tim here, just interrupting. This is a totally fully realized project. What were you doing in your life at the time? And I think what I'm trying to get at is, like, I'm trying to get a picture for your relationship to photography,
Yeah. Well, I was doing my day job. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by the question, but yeah, I had to sneak all my personal time I put into photography.
Yeah.
And that is a very conscious decision. I guess the shortest way to put it is that because I'm a designer and I hire so many photographers like you, Tim, you're the rare bird in a lot of cases, but I know so many professional photographers who are friends or colleagues that are so burned out doing the professional stuff all day long. The last thing they want to do is a personal project where they're picking up a camera.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't want to go that route. I just wanted to keep photography for me and be solely selfish and shoot what I want when I want. And purposely not ever try to mix money really and photography.
So right out of the gate, you knew you didn't want to work as a photographer. That's true?
That's true. Yep. I mean, I got into graphic design first, and my love for photography deepened. I'll just keep moving through these as we're talking, so we're not too long on these. My love for photography really deepened as I art directed other photographers and got to see all these different types of working styles. And I asked a ton of questions, like, what lens are you using there? Why are you shooting, with that light? And, drove them crazy because my job was really to be art directing, but, it was cool. And I was very, very fortunate to hire and art direct some of what I consider the best commercial photographers out there. Yeah. So that's sort of what deepened my love for photography, and then I sort of jumped in. But it was a very conscious decision not to mix the two. Mm-hmm. And again, very quickly, not spending too much time on this. I'm only showing 2 documentary projects, and really ones that sort of illustrate that idea of being able to immerse yourself in a situation. So this is this subculture that I stumbled upon with another photographer, a friend of mine. And basically what these people do is they ride these all sorts of 4-wheel vehicles. They race in the mud. They do everything but these cars in the mud. And it's what I found out is that it's this subculture. And these people travel all over up and down the East Coast. It probably goes on the West Coast as well. And it's a camping, basically they go into these sites, these private or personally owned properties that allow these things, and they race, and they basically anything goes. As long as you don't kill somebody, basically anything goes on in this situation. And so I was just fascinated with it, and went to the head that runs this organization and said, hey, can I photograph here? And she was really cool. I told her what I wanted to do, that I was less interested in the racing piece, that I really wanted to capture the lifestyle of what this subculture is about. And this is now, I'm going again this year, is the, I think, 4th year that I've gone.
That's beautiful. Beautiful stuff.
But it's wild. And that's an example again of what I just couldn't get out of street photography. I mean, I'm approaching this like street photography. It's all reportage, but being able to just be immersed in a culture is what really sort of, you know, I get off on.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you know, like these people travel in these vans and bring a jacuzzi and hook it up for the weekend. And it's made in America.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'll just quickly, there's just a few more that.
So this is, wheelchair.
What's that?
Pull in the wheelchair.
Oh yeah. Yep. You know, some families bring their kids. And then the after hours stuff gets pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Little Sodom and Gomorrah action.
Yeah.
So anyway, so this is where I came from, going into the project with Beatrice. And I guess in short, let me just get that up. So I'd done the documentary work for a while, and I wouldn't say that I get bored easily, but I just really sort of enjoy taking myself completely out of the comfort zone and seeing what happens. And so this particular project was a complete left turn for me. Like all my street photographer friends kind of didn't know what the hell I was doing, and that's okay. So I knew I was doing this project for me. And honestly, it started out that I just wanted to work with models so that I could create environments and atmospheres where I could control things, which is what you can't do in documentary work.
Yeah.
You know, you're experiencing what's going on in front of you, but you are not affecting things. You're a voyeur. So I really wanted to see if I could create an emotional body of work that was set up, and it was really just an experiment. And I worked with a variety of different models before I stumbled upon Beatrice, which is her real name. And by the way, keep an eye out, Tim. She may pop on to this at some point. She is working, but I said, hey, if you free up and you can come on, maybe people would like to ask you questions, because I did want to talk about this book for another Zoom presentation, and Beatrice was actually part of it. And it was kind of cool because I even got to hear things from her perspective that I didn't really even know. So it was really cool.
Very valuable.
Yeah. So are there particular questions, Tim, that you want to ask or talk about before we jump into this? Okay.
No, good, thanks. Before we get into this, there's a couple things that kind of came in here. A ton of questions actually. Here,
okay, fair enough.
Let's just see what we have here. From Anna Monroe, she goes, I'm really impressed with your colors and tonality. Now this is in terms of the very first stuff that you just showed. What do you do what do you look for in terms of color? I'm sorry. What color elements do you seek while doing your documentary work? What about, like, how do you use color, and what about color inspires you?
That's a really good question. It's a hard question to answer because, I intentionally saw the first project that I showed, even as I started showing up there. If I was shooting film, which I wasn't, I would have been shooting Triax. I saw that project as a black and white project right from the beginning. And so the street work is really, it's sort of a combination of being drawn to the palette of color and what's going on in the situation. So if I'm walking down the street or I'm at whatever, I look, I'm drawn to both color and content. And when there's something going on where the two of them are coexisting, that's sort of what draws me to it. But interestingly, because I started out shooting film, it's almost like when I'm shooting a picture, I very rarely will just take a color photograph and make it black and white. It's like when I see the picture, I see it either in black and white and color.
Right.
And so sometimes if it's street photography, I'm drawn to the color and what's going on with the color around it. I see it as a color shot. And other times I didn't show any black and white street photography, but that, it's probably light and shadow and also the content. I don't know that I answered the question, but I think it's just that I respond to color when I see it, and it's just part of the mix.
Yeah. No, that's good. Let's see. Along your photography journey, when did you feel you developed your current style, and when did you become the photographer you see yourself as now?
That's another great question.
These guys don't mess around, David.
No, I dig that. That's awesome.
They're just getting warmed up, in fact.
Yeah, cool. All right. I just may say and a lot more than I should, but I often hear that with other photographers saying, I'm really trying to develop my style. I'm trying to find my voice. And I think when I stopped trying and just followed my heart and my instincts, your style just sort of evolves naturally. I don't believe it's something that you can sort of, make a prescription for and develop a style. I think it's very personal. And when you start allowing yourself to shoot and see and not second guess what other people are going to think about it, your individual voice starts coming to the fore.
That's well stated. I will add a question to this because I think it's appropriate. Do you feel that the fact that you weren't working commercially kept you immune to the temptation of following trends?
Absolutely. Although I have to say, the street photography for community, and I don't know how many of the photographers on this call are street photographers or are familiar with it, but there is a huge culture of street photography. And I got bored with it really quick because I feel like there are styles. There are the people that feel like you have to shoot a Leica and you have to shoot film, or, you have to shoot and pack like a zillion different things into one frame. And that's what makes a good shot. Almost like, one of my other photographer friends calls it like paint by number shots, where it's like, it has zero emotion to it, but yeah, you've got all these perfectly placed geometric things. And it's boring. So I did that for a while, and then I guess it was just out of boredom that I just started going down different paths and trying and seeing what fit.
For sure.
And even with this project with Beatrice was I knew I was gonna, a lot of my friends and colleagues were gonna go like, what the hell are you doing? Like, and I knew they didn't quite get it, and some of them still don't, and that's okay. But yeah, I definitely feel like not being in the commercial world where you're told to, I've done it before to other photographers I've hired. Hey, can you shoot like, this guy for this shot, or can we make this one feel a little bit more like, and so, yeah, I could see that would screw people up in terms of, finding their own sort of vision and voice.
Oh, for sure. Here's another one. A lot of your color photos have this feeling of being staged because they're so well composed and often color coordinated. What's your approach to that? Do you usually sit in a spot and wait for the moment, or do you wander about and just happen upon the I lost that.
Yeah, no, I get the gist of the question. Yeah, no, I mean, when I started doing street photography, that is certainly one approach. There are many photographers that, as it's called in the street world, you find the stage and you wait for the actors to show up. I get really bored. I did it. I can't do it. I much prefer to just move around and be drawn and shoot very quick. And so I guess the look that things might be staged, maybe that's a compliment because they're not, but I guess it's just you get very quick at thinking on your feet and responding very quick, knowing your camera inside and out, having it at the right setting so that you don't really even have to think about the technical piece. You just see what you see and you throw it up to your eye. But I will work a scene a lot, like, oh, that crazy scene at the end where of the mud truck community where, all that craziness was going with the people with their clothes off and stuff. I mean, I worked that scene for a very long time. I embedded myself in the crowd, and that one I was holding up an LED light because it was pitch dark.
Yeah.
I don't like working with flash. But yeah, I worked it for a very long time to get the scene where everything fell together. So that's another way, I guess, of waiting for the stage. You find the stage and the players, and then you shoot and you shoot and you shoot and you shoot until the moment happens that you're looking for, where all the elements come together.
That's good. There are more questions, but we'll save those for the end and we'll let you get into Beatrice.
Okay. So do you want me to, basically what I did here is I showed the images here are in the sequence. I don't know. I'm guessing not many people have seen the whole book. So
no. What
I'll do is just sort of run through the images and then we can sort of open things up. The one thing, I'm going to show the images first and then I can tell you sort of the backstory.
Sounds good.
Okay. So that's the opening image. So the thing I will say about these pictures is we found the way I worked, because of coming from a documentary background, I still don't feel comfortable setting shots up. So what we would do is find the situation where the light was beautiful and I liked what was going on. And then I asked Beatrice right from the very beginning, I asked her not to pose as much as she could, that I wasn't looking for poses. I was looking for her to just be and express and just run through different, almost like I wasn't there. And so again, these shots, they happened very, very quickly. I was shooting very, very quickly and she was moving very quickly. And what she said to me very early on is, unless you tell me to stop, I'm just going to keep moving. And I said, that's great. And so it was sort of like a dance that we created.
Mm-hmm. And so you worked on this for how long? Just shy of 2 years.
And I probably would have, that's another thing that a lot of photographers ask is, when do you know that a project is over? This one sort of naturally came to an ending because COVID happened, number one. and Beatrice was living in the New England area, and she ended up going back to school, and she's Swedish, and moved back to Sweden. So it was sort of this natural ending where I felt like I wished if I had any regrets, that I probably would have followed this even longer, because the longer you stick with something, the deeper it gets.
I mean, there is a trope of photographers never ending a project because they don't know what their next project is. So
yeah, there's that too.
It's easy to just keep doing it and doing it, you know?
Yes, yeah, that's true.
So sometimes, I mean, myself, I think it's nice when things have to end.
Yeah. No, it actually felt right. It felt like we had created enough of a body of work that I felt like, okay, I think the story that I want to tell is probably in there. So for those of you who hasn't seen the book, this photograph is actually on side by side with this one. So they're very similar. Her eyes are open in the first shot and closed in the second.
So there's also like pictures like this where she's not in them. And myself, you know, in the book, when I, you know, was like dealing with the book that I had no idea what it was about or anything, it did have this, they were almost like a coda or something like that, like this kind of note that everything rested on and then things started again. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, and that evolved in the editing process. Like that wasn't something that I initially had conceived of, but as I started pinning up all the photographs on and starting to edit on the wall, it felt like it needed different notes. And I often make references. I was a musician prior to a designer, and so I often use musical analogies. And you know, it just felt like it needed a chorus. And then after a few choruses, it needed a bridge. And, but I wanted thematically the images all to make sense. The first one, I don't know if people noticed, but it was a gravestone in the background of that very first, I can go back to it. Hints at the fact that death is in the story.
Right.
This one is a bit of a transition image. Another photographer who had looked at this work said that these images are almost like palette cleansers that give the person sort of a break. But for me, it's sort of like a transition of, she closes her eyes, she's thinking about something. It's a hopeful image that then transfers into this next image, which is my Zoom things. I'm pushing the limits of full screen here. Try that again. So it's a transition to here of sort of a new beginning, cleansing. So they're very carefully thought out what those images are. Some of which I had in a back catalog of images where I started, and some I had to go out and take.
Oh, seriously? Oh, so
yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, some were like in your library or something like that.
No, exactly.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting.
And one of the unfortunate things looking at the images like this is that you don't get the rhythm of the way that it's laid out in book form.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, so many books are, you know, blank left page, image on the right, and that goes on for, you know, forever. And I guess it's because I design magazines and brochures that I really like, again, to have the layout and the sequencing feel musical, where you don't know what's going to happen on the next page. So sometimes there's a tiny single image, and then it's followed like this is a double spread image. And then there's a couple of small images side by side that sort of speak to each other. And it's gives you that sort of anticipation of not knowing what's next. And you're not getting that by seeing it on the screen like this. But and this image is also in the book combined on the opposite page with the following image. So this one and this one are together.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. And also just in terms of building a book, another ingredient is I intentionally wanted to mix up some of the black and white and color images. Some purists feel that, you know, either a body work should be black and white or it should be color. I don't really subscribe to that unless it's disruptive, but I felt like I could get away with that in this. But again, you have to think about how you're composing the entire book so that when a black and white image happens, it makes sense. It doesn't, you know, feel like it comes out of left field.
Yeah, usually I hate when these things are combined, you know what I mean? But, you know, with yours, I just accepted whatever it was, and it just seemed like, well, this is the obvious next thing, kind of, you know what I mean?
So to hit a metaphor over the head, there's beauty in death. You know, these are the types of things that, but again, I didn't know that when I was doing the book. It was pure, I was working purely intuitively. And it's only that I've been able to live with this and have to talk about it that I see now what my subconscious was doing.
So now there's a statement. The book has no words, but then there's a statement on the website. And some of these students have read this statement, and then half of the class hasn't, you know, because they're from another class. Do you want to? When do you want to elaborate on that? Do you want to wait to the end, or?
No, I think it's fine. We're halfway through, I think, so that would be a good time. So what happened the very first time that I worked with Beatrice, we actually had a little trouble scheduling our first shoot. And that was partially what was going on with her personal life, I later learned. She's very young. She's, I think she's about 27 or 28 now. But when the first time I met her, I discovered that her husband had died just a few months prior to us getting together. And so she shared that with me, and somehow just it resonated with the type of work that I was really looking to do, which was create something with more substance.
Yeah.
And to not just take pretty pictures of her posing. And so, but I knew, you know, as I explained to her before we got together, I explained what I was looking for in shooting with her. And I explained the whole, that, you know, I want us to get together for a number of hours and just get comfortable and work and get to the point where you're comfortable just sort of moving around the room and not feeling like you have to pose. And so that just sort of naturally, when she told me this, the part about her husband dying, it just sort of coincided with, she just started expressing where she was at, and she shared her vulnerability, and a lot of it was just completely unspoken.
Yeah.
But she didn't shy away from going to sometimes dark places, and sometimes very vulnerable places. And that's sort of the beauty, I think, of the camera, because, you know, there's this safe space between the subject and the photographer if they're comfortable in front of a camera. And, you know, I've heard other photographers talk about it, and it's yeah, it's sort of like you're looking to create something yourself, and they're looking to express something, and you've got the safe spot of the camera between you. Yeah, so it just, this very magical thing happened. And so yeah, the one thing I wanted to point out, because I think it's really important, is that I knew the type of imagery that I wanted to get even before I learned about her personal backstory and all of that. I knew that it wasn't going to be set up a photo shoot for 1 or 2 hours and get some shots. I knew like the type of emotional depth that I was looking for, and authenticity really only happens when you spend time. So our sessions were, you know, a minimum of 4 hours.
Right.
When we got together.
Right.
And that wasn't shooting all the time. You know, sometimes it was just talking. Sometimes it wasn't talking, just sort of hanging out. But that's where this sort of trust thing, which I think is really important, both in documentary work and in this type of work, is at least that's the only way I know how to do it. And,
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. So when you essentially like hired her, you didn't know any of this stuff about this death of her husband.
Not
You
at
just
all.
knew it was interesting looking through a selfie or something like that. I would assume.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, it just sort of, you know, that's what's really, I think, good for, you know, photographers at the beginnings of their journey, is to, like, if you have an instinct to do something, just do it. You know, don't ask yourself like, is that stupid, or, you know.
Oh yeah.
And like, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And a lot of people, you know, like I said, my friends and colleagues were like, you know, whatever, I don't really understand what you're doing, but, you know, but it was just like, and so, and those, that intuition leads to some of the most interesting things that you could never have conceived of. And so I just feel like, you know, where Beatrice was at in her life, and where what I was trying or interested in creating photographically just sort of naturally coincided.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But that's the sort of thing you can never script, you know.
No. It happens once. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's hard to do it again.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, here's a question here, just as we're, you know, kind of getting into the depth of the model and photographer relationship. Would you consider Beatrice a muse? And, but there's a more elaborate kind of version of this. Let me, how do you feel this project converses about the photographer-model relationship, one which does have a long history, both pro and con? And what do you think about the gaze, meaning hers, yours, and then ours as the viewer in this project? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, kind of. Yes. Yeah, it does. You know, I very purposely, yes, I wanted to work with a model. Yes, I wanted to work with a female model. Yes, I had to find her attractive and in a way that I was interested in photographing her. That is all true. But I purposely in the editing process included women photographers in the development of this project, because I was very sensitive that I did not want it to feel like the male gaze. It was something I was very conscious of. And I mean, I guess sometimes you probably can't avoid that perhaps, but I was much more interested in the story, the narrative coming through than, stopping and going, oh, look how beautiful she is, or look, she's standing in the shower, or I don't know if that fully answers the question. That, that would be if Beatrice does show up, I'd love to hear her response.
Oh yeah, no, you only
that would be great. Yeah. But I guess, just to put a period on that, I feel like I shot as much as I could from the heart, from an authentic place. I believe that Beatrice responded to that, and is what allowed the vulnerability and emotion that she shared. And so to me that piece is successful, and I feel good about it.
Yeah. No, it feels like a collaboration, like a give and take, And then me as a viewer, my reaction when I first saw the book was, it felt a little uncomfortable for me to be seeing this thing that seems like I'm peering in on someone's interpersonal relationship. It didn't feel like a romantic relationship, but it felt like I'm not supposed to be here, was the general feeling, and a lot of times you get that feeling in Nan Golden's work and other photographers who, have that kind of snapshot aesthetic, you know what I mean?
Right. And I would say that was definitely something I was hoping to create, and I wasn't even convinced that it could be created without a relationship, like a romantic perhaps relationship.
No, makes sense. And then someone here just also chimed in. They said, I may have missed it, but how exactly did you get Beatrice as your model?
Through a modeling agency.
Oh, seriously? Oh my God.
Yeah, totally. Yep. And what was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, that was part of it. And I'd gone through a number of people, and I had the same objective with all of the models that I worked with, but it's all about chemistry, just like anything in life. And when you feel it, you know it. And she just got it. And the beauty of it too is that, yes, she was a model, but she was also an actor, an actress. And I feel like that is almost more important than a model, for the fact that she got what I was looking for. Like, I'm not looking for you to pose. Anytime you pose, I'm really not interested, but so I think that definitely helped a lot in terms of
Oh, for sure.
And so some of these shots were done on locations. I didn't, when I started this project, I didn't want to shoot her in the studio. I wanted it to feel like very lived in situation. So the majority of them are done in Airbnbs, houses that I would rent, and we'd shoot in. As we got to know each other better, she ended up, before she moved out of the house that she lived with her husband, she invited me to come over there and shoot there. This particular shot was there. The shot in the basement at the beginning of the book was also the basement of the house. So it adds this whole other dimension to the story.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow. So as you are sharing this project, does it surprise you that people don't, quote, get it, whatever that means?
A lot of it is that the types of photographers that, like the photographers in my collective, they're all very much of the street photography mentality. Some are more, have sort of grown beyond that and are trying different things. And so those people got it more than others. But there is such a mentality within that world. And if you get to be known in that world and people, then you throw them a curveball like this. So I knew that, no, it didn't really surprise me. And I knew that going into it. It's like, this isn't going to resonate with everyone.
Well, I mean, there is the idea, though, if, you know, say the projects you showed us in the beginning of class, they all had a quick elevator pitch.
Yeah.
You know, mud party, you know, like mental institution. And it would be much harder to come up with the what is this book about type of, you know, sentence here.
Well, it's the very first time we talked, Tim. I was like, you know, and you were asking me about it. I realized, you know, it's just like, I'm very comfortable talking about, you know, the documentary projects because, you know, it's like you said, they're much easier to talk about. This is very, very personal, both for her and me. In that, you know, and so I mentioned that I was a musician previously, and I also composed and wrote songs. It felt the same way, like when I'd write a song and then play it in front of an audience, that sort of exposed feeling that none of my other work did. So I found it very hard to talk about. It's almost like trying to express a song, you know, like, so what's that song about? Well,
yeah. What do you think it's about?
Yeah, well, exactly. And that intentionally is what I wanted from the book and why I specifically decided not to write about the backstory in the book, is that I wanted to see and again, this book was an experiment to see if that could come across, that people would be engaged enough in the story that they'd create their own narrative.
So whose work were you looking at that may have inspired this? Like, I know you look at a lot of photographers. Was there anyone in particular who did a project and you said, ooh, this might have a cousin in that, you know?
Not really, believe it or not. I got the idea for wanting to do this from watching movies and being really drawn to. So what I do when I'm watching movies that particularly I find amazing, I pause a scene and I just take a shot of it with my phone. And so I have this whole library of images, and sometimes it's the lighting I'm drawn to, or sometimes it's the pose, but I find them really emotional. And so I have so that's what made me want to try this type of photography, to see if I could create something cinematic. But no, I wouldn't say that there was a particular, I've since found other photographers, like when I started this project, the other photographer that we both know, Don Hammerman, told me I should look at Todd Heido's work. And so, you know, I actually don't particularly love the way that he photographs women personally, but I could see why, you know, other people turned me on to Mona Kuhn. But yeah, I wouldn't say that anyone in particular jumped to mind.
The idea of you snapping pictures off of a movie with your phone wins as the biggest, nerdiest photo nerd thing I've ever heard.
I was almost embarrassed to admit it, you know?
No, it's the second time you told me, and the first time it didn't sink in. No, that is great, and I am going to get that tattooed on my back.
So this is the second to last photograph. This is the second to last photograph. And then it ends here. Assuming Zoom is going to cooperate. Try again.
So that's it. Oh, that's the end. I forgot.
Yep.
So what is that, her apartment, or we're supposed to think it's her apartment, or?
Is it really her? Is it really her?
No, it's not. She's not in this shot. And actually this came from my library of previous shots. It's in New York.
I forgot that was the ending. Huh. That's great. That's beautiful. So, actually, I won't ask questions. Let's kind of open it up to the students here. But David, I am a big believer in this work. You delivered above and beyond. You made something very special here. I like this work a lot. Congratulations for creating it and totally stepping out of your comfort zone, which I believe you did. Let's stop sharing and open it up to the class, and then it's a little easier to talk, and they can ask you their questions themselves, and then I can actually read some of the ones that we haven't read here. Actually, let me just kind of sneak into one here, and then I'll let the class take over. From Jeffrey Harrison, he says, how did you find the rhythm, the red thread, the music in the work? How did it start revealing itself? And I thought that was an interesting question, because it's obviously in the work, but it's almost like, did you discover it, or did you make it happen?
Right. I think going back to, and I mean, not to cop out on these questions, but going back to, why it's hard for me to talk about this work is because so much of it is intuitive. And I guess a big part of that is that I've been a designer for so long. I've edited other photographers' work for so long. You just start following your intuition, and if something feels right, you go with it. You don't question it. And so if there's a red thread, no, I would say that is probably a subconscious connection, that it was not intentional.
Yeah, interesting. Let's see, Garen, you had a series of questions and statements here. I'm just wondering if you wanted to contextualize them and speak up.
Let me search through this history.
Or just speak off the top of your head as well.
My head oft forget. Oh, I asked initially, what do you personally think is the most important photographic element in your work for Beatrice, and then also in documentary work in general?
Yeah, you don't mess around with the questions.
Hell no.
The most important element in the Beatrice work, I would say, is, for me, is emotion and authenticity. That's what you could get into more technical things about, the variables of lighting and all that sort of stuff. But no, the bottom line is that I wanted to create something that felt authentic and was emotional, made people stop and think. I do believe, that the culture that we're in, where we're so immersed in images day in and day out, that it's really rare that photographs make you stop and go, and look at them for more than, a second and a half. And so if I strove to do anything, it was to really make people think and make them feel something. And then in the documentary work, I guess I'd have to speak individually to sort of the mental health piece was, again, emotion, but empathy, I guess. And to see the various people that I photographed, not as mentally ill patients, but as people, that they could find empathy and compassion for. And then the mud truck project, I guess, again, empathy, but in a different way. It's meant to be amusing, it's meant to be outrageous, because that's what it is. But for people to just sort of not judge what they're doing, but to just appreciate it. Because like it or not, they're passionate about it, and to present it in this sort of neutral way that it can be entertaining for others, but also, because a lot of the people in that community are, stand in a political spectrum that I don't really relate to or agree with. But I was just trying to put all that aside and just sort of look at these people that are totally passionate about what they do. And so that's what I mean about empathy in that particular project.
Thank you. Yeah, it was cool seeing the cohesiveness of emotion through all of it, and then seeing the portrait work of a predominant street photographer side by side. So thank you. Also, another kind of like satirical joke I put in the chat was that the reason I haven't seen the book is because it's on the way to my house and I need a shipping update.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm just kidding.
He wants an update on his tracking.
I just want to know about the tracking.
I'll tell you what, it's going to be mailed this weekend.
All right.
It should move pretty quick. Where are you located?
North Carolina.
Oh yeah, you'll probably get it in like 2 days.
All right.
I hope you like it. Thank you very much for supporting it.
Thanks for showing the work today.
Thank you.
Here's a question from Bowen. And Bowen says that Beatrice seems like a very special series in your projects, in simple terms, that it's completely different from all the others. You always focus on one group of people in your other projects, but Beatrice is like a monodrama. Will you continue to shoot this type of project? Or, what would be the next thing you'd pursue?
Yeah, I'm kind of at that place now, actually. In the spirit of full disclosure, I will say that my wife wasn't particularly a big fan of the Beatrice project, although my intentions were completely pure. And as much as I tried to explain what I was trying to do, she couldn't help but be a little jealous about it.
That's honest.
Which I think is honest and fair. And so I'm very cautious to sort of jump into something like that again. One of the things I'm interested in, actually, and I have been for years, is photographing someone who's really elderly, and doing sort of a day in the life, for lack of a better word, series on them. But at the moment, I don't know what's gonna bubble up.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing that thing about your, the jealousy within your family. Yeah. We had someone last week who, was in these situations that some people in the class considered risky, and there was the question as to whether he was endangering his family by, engaging with these things. And so, photographers take risks. You know what I mean? And certainly I've taken risks and things I've done that my family was not very supportive of, and and you don't really know, until like kind of the cards play out, if this is a positive, this is a negative. Yep. No, I appreciate that's very honest for you to share that. Yeah. There was a couple other questions here. Shane, you had a question that was about the gear, like when you were watching the mud thing, I think. But do you want to verbalize that?
Yeah, through Proving Grounds. I was just kind of curious because I actually shot at La Tomatina one year, which is like the big tomato fight in Spain. So I was just kind of curious, like, how worried were you about your gear, and like what type of protection did you use, if you used any? Because like I was fully covered with I was like, no tomato is getting in my camera.
Yeah. Yeah, that might, I work really close. I don't know if you can tell, but all that stuff in the mud community is with a 24mm. I like to really be in it, but I'm also aware of my camera. So no, I wouldn't say I did anything really to protect my camera other than to pull it under my shirt if things got, too hairy. But no, so that, what you can't see is that even speaking to danger that Tim mentioned, some pretty wild shit goes on there, and it could turn sideways at any moment, and so you just have to be sort of have that eye in the back of your head, trust your instincts. But I guess I think of probably my own safety before the camera, and just do common sense stuff with it. I think the Tomato Festival is probably more prone to ruining gear than, although, yeah, there's mud, you can sort of control more or less how close you're to really gnarly situations. So.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
That was good. There's a couple, well, here, just to go off of what was just recently discussed, Stanley, you had a question that I thought was very insightful. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, I was just wondering, after your wife saw the project, did she change her mind about the feelings she had while you're working on the project, or did it only reinforce those feelings of jealousy after she saw the project?
That's a really good question, really smart question too. I had thought, and when I showed the book, to friends, and they were like, "Oh man, she'll get it when she sees the book," and it didn't quite go as well as I thought it would have. But she got it, and the amazing thing about my wife is that she would never say, even when I was in the middle of the project, she would never say, "I'm not going to tell you or ask you not to do that. I'm not going to be that person." I would never do that, which almost puts more on yourself. And it's not in a manipulative way at all, but it makes you think twice about, all right, how far do I really want to push this? Which is why I'd be cautious about getting into kind of a similar project. And quite honestly, I feel like I've gotten that out of my system. But to answer your question, I think she gets it intellectually, but then sort of emotionally, there's just here's this young, beautiful, Swedish actress, and so.
No, for sure. No, excellent question. And I think whenever there's a collaboration, there's power in that, and I think it's a worthy thing to question.
Oh, totally. And what was really great, the other talk that I did about the book, one of the people asked about the level of the intimacy, that they saw a lot of intimacy in the book. And what's really cool is I had Beatrice answer that question, because I was really interested to hear. And if I can remember correctly, it was basically like sort of what I explained, which is, she knew she could trust me. She knew that my intentions were pure, and you can create intimacy without actually being in an intimate relationship. And and that was the part I didn't know if I could do right from the beginning, which was part of the experiment.
Oh yeah. Now, Eddie, you had a question that kind of tied into like what David does for a living and how that related to the book creation of the book. Do you want to revisit that?
I'd have his mute on.
We can't hear you yet.
Looks like he's got a killer microphone when he.
Yeah. Let me try to read. I will read Eddie's question because we can't hear Eddie. But I think what it was for me to kind of paraphrase, let me see if I can find it because it was early in the game here. How has your background in graphic design and art direction informed your way of seeing the images you are creating? Has this impacted your work on Beatrice as your first book, or was it just time?
I would say that absolutely my training in graphic design and art directing other photographers played an enormous part in the way that I see and compose. You know, sometimes people ask me, you know, about, you know, how did you get the composition so well balanced? And it's just that it's the kind of stuff I just take for granted because I've been doing it for so long. I just naturally compose it without having to give a lot of thought. And that's just doing something over and over and over and over again. I did know, and the types of photographers that I'm really drawn to, there's a joke sort of in the photography world, like that if a picture's taken by a graphic designer, it's very obvious. And I can't think of a particular photographer off the top of my head, but you know, sort of very geometric graphic shapes. It's almost like a graphic composition. And I'm much more drawn to the photographers that are much looser and a little bit sloppier, and but still the composition holds together. However, I feel like I probably can't fight what is ingrained in me in terms of the way I see and compose. So what might be sloppy for me in my mind is probably, you know, pretty well balanced or whatever. And I think that's just, you know, somebody had asked about style. I think that's just who I am. That's just how I see. And
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Anna Rose, you had some questions, many questions throughout here, and none of which I've asked yet. And then, so I'm just wondering if you wanted to elaborate on any of them, or were some of them answered, or.
Well, no, actually, you asked quite a few, and thank you, David, for answering them. I asked the one about your color, and you know that in the beginning, as well as the combination of black and white with color in your project. Would you, this may go off, and Timothy, if you don't want to go in this direction, just let me know, but would you be willing to share a little bit about your role as an art director? You touched a little bit on what you look for in photographers as an art director, and maybe instead of the photographer hat, looking at it from an art director hat, what kind of advice would you give to us as MFA students?
No, I think that's a cool question. And I would say to really try to stand out, to not, you know, to not be afraid of your work, or portfolio, not feeling, you know, in line with everybody else's, or what, you know, your perceived notions of what that should be. You know, oftentimes I will hire a photographer based on their personal work. So I don't know if that's what your instructors are telling you to do as well, include personal work in your portfolio. I might maybe have a personal section or something, but that's where I really get to see like what somebody's passionate about, and you know, how they really see and how they compose when they're not, you know, in a commercial setting. You know, the photographers that I'm drawn to, I've always been, I just look at a lot of people's work, and when stuff jumps out to me, Timothy's work is a great example. You know, I was drawn to his personal work first, and it wasn't until like years later that one of my clients, which is Tufts University, I saw that, you know, one of their other schools had hired Tim to do one of their projects. And I was like, oh yeah, my God, I really didn't even think of Timothy as a commercial photographer. I was thinking of almost more like a fine artist photographer. And then I went back and looked at his commercial portfolio, and I was like, oh shit, that's great. And so, yeah, I guess I wouldn't shy away from showing some personal work. How, you know, I guess nowadays it would just be a website, it wouldn't be a portfolio, but you know, don't shy away from having a personal link, or you know, personal projects you're working on in addition to the commercial stuff. I mean, it obviously depends on what type of commercial photography you're doing, whether it's, you know, studio or portrait, or you know, whatever, but it shows a different dynamic.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
That's good. That's a good
Yeah,
question.
the other thing that really just stood out to me, and you know, I'm looking at these all over the place, is that, you know, don't forget to send postcards in this day and age. You know, they're really cheap. Go to well, there's tons of different postcard places out there, but in this day and age, art directors are so bombarded with emails that, you know, often it's just like, oh my God, you know, I probably, honest to God, I probably get 30 emails from different photographers each day. And no, I don't look at them all. And, but when a postcard arrives in the mail and catches my attention, I'll go to their site and I'll obviously, you know, hold on to it. So it's sort of like the reversed mentality where, you know, back when I was trying to get started in graphic design, everything went through the mail, and nowadays everybody sends things electronically and doesn't use the mail. So that's a way of really standing out from the competition. So consider that.
Would you say in sending postcards, send your personal work, or would you suggest sending your commercial work? What is most catching as an artist? Because you have one image to send if you send a postcard. So
yeah, you got it. I know it's tough. Send an image that is memorable, and if that's personal or, you know, something you did for school, something that's going to stop somebody in their tracks, you know, and that's hard to do these days. So if you have to do that with a personal piece, do it. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be representative of the type of work you want to be doing, but at least if it gets them to your website, job done, you know.
That's very well stated. Ofer Tenenbaum, you had a statement you kind of put in the chat earlier that I couldn't tell if it was a question or if it was a statement. Did you want to speak up?
I was just saying that I didn't have any questions for all the reasons that that David mentioned. I think that your work is very transparent. I'm not, you know, I'm humbled by your work, but I see a lot of my work in your work, or vice versa, you know, so there's a relationship there. And so I can recognize all the answers, all the questions that I have, you answer with your photos. So I don't have, you're very transparent. You just shoot super close. You do the stuff with the color to the level that, you know, I would have done. So for me, I'm looking at somebody very familiar without knowing you. I just don't have any questions. And then I did say, well, I might have questions during this event, and then, you know, during this presentation. And so, you know, you'll see this project about Beatrice, and then you immediately pop the question on, you know, would that cause any weird thoughts about, you know, you taking pictures of a younger lady? And within 2 seconds, you answer that question. And then within 2 seconds, you answer the questions about your wife. And then, you know, like, why color in black and white? And within 2 seconds, you answer that question. So I just applaud you for just being super transparent about everything, both your photography and then being honest about it. You know, you're an open book, in my opinion. And so that doesn't really leave a lot to ask for me.
Thank you very much. It's a very sweet thing to say. Thank you.
I did have a question to Garen. And I think it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a joke. And I thought it was relevant to this conversation because Garen has the same kind of daily challenge that you had with Beatrice. He's dealing with it daily. I mean, he takes photos of the most beautiful women in the world. And then he's got Amy, his, you know, kind of like partner in life right now. And I was wondering how, you know, if he had the same issues. I don't know if it's relevant to ask this question, you know, in this form, but it was very relevant to what you described with your wife. And so I was just wondering if Garen had something to add about that one.
Am I actually supposed to answer this?
Yeah, we have Garen booked to be the guest artist 3 weeks from now. Let's save that question for then. Let's focus on our current guest artist.
But it did reflect that it's not, you know, this issue is not exclusive to you. I mean, you know.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm a male photographer, and I have, you know, wife, 2 daughters, and I also, you know, work with models, and I don't think they ever had an issue with it, but maybe they did, and I didn't look into that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that one of the things why I brought that up is because there is such a history that we're dealing with here, and photographic history of the muse and the subject and the model and the gaze. And that it was like, David, you were almost dealing with that in such an open way. So I wanted to hear some of the backstory of how you were thinking about that, because I could see that that would be something that's relevant in contemporary photography. One, how are you going to alter that conversation? Like what is that? How are you bringing this level of intimacy between a male photographer and a female model to the public, and going to address that? Because I feel like in this day and age, it's always, that conversation is something that's super dynamic. It's constantly happening. So I appreciate that it came up. I think that for me, that was one of the really fascinating parts of this dialogue today.
And Adrian, it's 1 or 2 decades over, right? So there's also an age gap, a generation gap. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was first starting photography, reading the Edward Weston diaries, like thinking about these power dynamics, these things that, we all learn about, and it goes back into whenever that was, 1950s,
right.
Thinking of something like that, and how we have those conversations now, in regards to all of, these wonderful people who are in this room, who are all different ages, and, coming to photography from so many different perspectives. So
Right.
super interesting.
Absolutely.
Interesting conversation.
Oh yeah, it's a whole topic, important topic.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and changing all the time, and the different generations view it differently, and no, it's in flux for sure. And there's things like we as a school have taught in the past that would never fly now. You know what I mean? That we look at and hear from students. So no, these things move fast. You know what I mean about the photographer and model relation. Like interaction.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, interesting. So, I think to me, we have this, but does anyone else have any questions for David, who has been so generous and so very transparent in such a refreshing way? Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yeah, Alana.
Hi. Yeah, first of all, David, beautiful body of work. Love it so much. And I think the way you were talking about striving for authenticity really came through. So I think you were super successful in that way. My question was, what was your kind of plan for shooting with Beatrice before you learned about her husband's passing? Because it feels like loss and grief is such a huge theme in the work. So I kind of wonder what direction you were planning to go prior to learning that.
It's a really good question. And the answer is I honestly didn't know. I knew that I was interested in this idea, if I could shoot and control things, but leave enough room and freedom so that I wasn't actually posing the person. And if within that environment, we could create something authentic and emotional that didn't feel contrived or set up, I guess. So it really started out much more as a formal, can I do this? It was really curiosity. And this whole idea that, so that's I think is a really good thing that I've found in terms of following your intuition, is that, it was just that curiosity that led me to just trying this type of photography. And then this whole other thing happened. And so I just followed that. And even when we started working together, and I knew I wanted to, after the first time, I wanted to work with her again, because I just felt there was something real there. I never had in the back of my mind, like, oh, I'm going to make a book of this. Never even occurred to me. I knew that it was a body of work because that's what I think in terms of like a body of work. But, you know, this whole idea of creating a book, that was completely like an afterthought. So I just think what I learned is that just follow those things that you're drawn to, and sort of like breadcrumbs fall, you know, you start for one purpose and then something else really interesting happens and that resonates, follow that. And then something else happens, follow that. And I've learned that lesson a couple of times, and I'm continue to learn it. But it's so many people feel like with a project like this, like, oh, I have to think of a project and I want to make a book of this project. And
Yeah.
and you're automatically right tying your hands right from the beginning, because it's just like, you know, you're not allowing for experimentation or just things just naturally to occur. So I would just say, you know, try to forget about the big picture and just, you know, follow what feels right. And if something is something you want to follow it and see where it leads. Maybe it's a dead end, but you'll have fun doing it.
That's good.
Thank
Yeah, you
you.
cannot win if you don't play.
There you go. So true. So true.
I think we have it, David. This was very special. Thank you.
Thank you.
This was your book was surprising, and your talk was equally so.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful.